Jake Morrison looked out the small window of the Earthship New Horizon as it approached the massive space station called Nexus Prime. The station was bigger than any city on Earth and gleamed with silver metal and blue lights. This was where the Galactic Council met to decide the fate of thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Jake felt his heart beating fast as he straightened his best diplomatic uniform. Today would be humanity's first official meeting with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Katie Brooks stood beside him, checking her tablet for the 100th time. She was Jake's assistant and had spent months learning about alien cultures and languages. The other members of their small team were also nervous but trying to hide it. They all knew how important this day was for Earth and all of humanity. The docking bay was enormous and filled with ships from dozens of different alien species. Some ships looked like giant crystals, while others were shaped like sea creatures. The human ship looked tiny and plain next to these amazing vessels. Jake tried not to feel small as they walked through the station's corridors toward the main council chamber. The hallways were filled with alien beings that Jake had only seen in pictures before. Tall blue creatures with 4 arms walked alongside, floating jellyfish-like beings that glowed with soft light. Some aliens looked almost human, while others were so strange that Jake could not even guess how they moved or breathed. Most of them barely glanced at the human delegation as they passed. When they reached the council chamber, Jake's mouth fell open. The room was huge, with thousands of seats arranged in circles around a central speaking area. Holographic displays showed star maps and alien writing that changed constantly. The ceiling was a dome that showed the stars outside the station, making it feel like they were floating in space itself. A tall, thin alien with gray skin and large black eyes approached them. He wore fancy robes covered in symbols that seemed to move and change color. This was Vexithari, the Prime Minister of the Zeltharian Empire, and one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He looked down at Jake with what might have been a smile, but seemed more like someone looking at an amusing pet. "Welcome, primitive humans, to our council," said Vexithari in perfect English, though his voice had a strange musical quality that made it hard to take seriously. "We have prepared a special place for your species in our great assembly. Follow me and try not to touch anything important." Jake followed Vexithari through the chamber, noticing how other aliens stopped their conversations to stare at the humans. Some pointed and made sounds that might have been laughter. Others just looked bored, as if humans were not worth their attention. Jake kept his face calm and professional, even though he felt embarrassed by all the staring. Their assigned seats were in the very back of the chamber, so far from the central speaking area that Jake could barely see the main podium. The seats themselves were clearly not made for human bodies and were uncomfortable to sit in. Katie whispered that she could not get a clear view of the translation screens from this distance. The session began with Vexithari introducing humanity to the council. He spoke about Earth as if it was a backward planet full of violent children who needed guidance from their betters. He mentioned human wars and environmental problems while completely ignoring any human achievements. The alien audience made sounds of amusement and agreement. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he walked to a small podium near their seats rather than the main speaking platform. As he began his carefully prepared speech about humanity's desire for peaceful cooperation, his words came out of the translation system as animal noises. The entire chamber erupted in laughter, as barks, meows, and rooster calls echoed from the speakers instead of Jake's diplomatic words. Katie frantically worked on her tablet trying to fix the translation system, but every attempt only made the animal sounds louder and more ridiculous. Jake stood there helplessly as thousands of alien beings laughed at him. His face burned with shame, but he forced himself to remain standing until the laughter died down. After the translation incident, things only got worse. The council assigned Earth to handle waste management for the Outer Rim colonies. They gave humanity mining rights to asteroids that had already been stripped of valuable materials. When Jake tried to negotiate better terms, a large alien with tentacles for arms suggested that humans should be grateful for any work at all, considering their primitive technology. The final insult came when they presented the protection treaties. Earth would pay massive fees to 3 different alien military forces for protection from threats that the humans had never even heard of. In exchange, Earth would receive no defensive technology and no voice in galactic security matters. It was basically paying protection money to alien gangsters. Jake realized this was not incompetence or bureaucratic confusion. This was a deliberate plan to turn humanity into servants. Every term in every treaty was designed to keep Earth weak and dependent. The aliens had already decided that humans were only good for menial labor and paying tribute to their betters. As the session ended, Jake caught sight of an old alien sitting in one of the observer sections. This being looked like a turtle that could walk upright and had kind, intelligent eyes. When their eyes met, the alien gave Jake a tiny nod that seemed to say he understood what was really happening here. For a moment, Jake felt less alone in this chamber full of enemies. Katie whispered urgently in Jake's ear that their ship's communication systems were being blocked and someone was draining their fuel cells. They were trapped on the station until the aliens decided to let them leave. Jake signed the humiliating treaties because he had no choice, but he promised himself that this would not be the end of the story. Walking back to their ship through corridors full of laughing aliens, Jake began planning humanity's response. Earth had been underestimated before by enemies who thought humans were weak and primitive. Those enemies had always learned too late that humans were much more dangerous than they appeared. The Galactic Council was about to learn the same lesson, but Jake would make sure they learned it slowly and painfully. The journey back to Earth would give Jake time to think and plan. Humanity had been humiliated today, but they would not stay humiliated forever. President Susan Carter sat in the White House Situation Room listening to Jake Morrison's report about the disaster at the Galactic Council. The other world leaders, joined by video link from their capitals, all had the same angry expression on their faces. Humanity had been treated like children, and there was nothing they could do about it with their current technology and resources. The treaties Jake had been forced to sign were even worse than they had initially appeared. Earth would send hundreds of thousands of workers to alien worlds to clean up their garbage and mine worthless rocks. Humans would pay enormous fees for protection from threats they did not understand. Meanwhile, Earth would receive almost nothing in return except the privilege of not being destroyed by alien weapons. Susan stood up and walked to the window overlooking the White House lawn. She had been president during 3 major crises and had never backed down from a fight. She was not about to start now, even if the enemy had technology that could destroy Earth from across the galaxy. Humans had always found ways to beat stronger opponents, and she believed they could do it again. The president turned back to face the room and announced her decision. Earth would honor the treaties, but only as a cover for something much bigger. She authorized Project Looking Glass, the largest intelligence operation in human history. If the aliens wanted human workers spread across the galaxy, then humanity would use that access to learn everything possible about their enemies. Dr. Alan Pierce was chosen to lead the project. He had spent 20 years with the CIA learning how to gather secrets in hostile territory. He understood that the best spies were often people that enemies ignored or looked down upon. The aliens clearly saw humans as harmless servants, which made them perfect for infiltration work. Within weeks, the first groups of human workers were shipping out to alien worlds. Officially, they were janitors, miners, and maintenance staff. Secretly, many of them were trained intelligence agents with advanced recording equipment hidden in their work tools. Others were scientists and engineers who could analyze alien technology while pretending to clean it. Lisa Parks volunteered for one of the most dangerous assignments. She would work as a maintenance technician on Nexus Prime Station itself, right in the heart of alien power. Lisa had been an engineer for NASA before the project and could understand complex systems quickly. Her job was to map the station's defenses and find any weaknesses that could be exploited later. On her first day working in the station's engineering levels, Lisa discovered something amazing. The aliens had built incredibly advanced defensive systems to protect against attacks from space, but they had never considered the possibility of sabotage from inside. The maintenance tunnels and service areas had almost no security, because the aliens assumed their servants would never dare to act against them. Meanwhile, other human agents were spreading across the galaxy, learning the secrets of major alien civilizations. Captain Ron Hayes was assigned to work in the industrial areas of Zeltharia Prime, the home world of the arrogant aliens who had laughed at Jake Morrison. Ron quickly learned that Zeltharian society was much more fragile than it appeared. The ruling class of Zeltharians had not done physical work for generations. They depended completely on automated systems and servant species to keep their civilization running. Their factories and power plants were operated by non-Zeltharian workers who were treated badly and paid almost nothing. Ron realized that if these workers ever organized and rebelled, the entire Zeltharian system would collapse overnight. Dr. Karen Bell was working undercover as an accountant for Mortian trade companies. The Mortians controlled much of the galaxy's economy and were known for their brilliant business skills. Karen's job was to figure out how they had become so wealthy and powerful. What she discovered shocked her. The Mortian economy was built on a massive lie. They claimed to control rare minerals that were essential for advanced technology. These minerals were supposedly found only on a few planets controlled by Mortian companies. But Karen's analysis of shipping records and geological surveys revealed the truth. The rare minerals were actually common throughout the galaxy, but the Mortians had been hiding this fact for centuries. The Mortians maintained artificial scarcity by controlling mining operations and spreading false information about mineral deposits. They had convinced the galaxy that certain materials were incredibly rare when huge deposits existed on hundreds of worlds. It was the biggest fraud in galactic history, and only the Mortians knew the truth. Dr. Chris Morgan was assigned to study the Kregan Empire, the most feared military force in the galaxy. The Kregans were known as unstoppable warriors who had conquered dozens of star systems through pure violence. But Chris discovered that the mighty Kregan military was hiding a terrible secret. The Kregan species was dying out. Their warrior culture encouraged constant fighting and discouraged family life. Their birth rate had been dropping for generations, and genetic diversity was disappearing. Most of their recent military victories had actually been won by robot soldiers controlled from hidden bases. The organic Kregan population was probably less than 10% of what other species believed. The Kregans maintained their fearsome reputation through careful propaganda and staged battles. They would send robot armies to fight while organic Kregans watched from safety. Enemy forces would report fighting unstoppable Kregan warriors without realizing they were actually fighting machines. The deception had worked for decades, but it could not last forever. As months passed, more intelligence flowed back to Earth from human agents across the galaxy. Alan Pierce compiled the information into detailed profiles of every major alien species. Each civilization that seemed powerful and advanced actually had critical weaknesses that could be exploited by someone smart enough to see them. President Carter met regularly with Pierce to review the intelligence reports. She was amazed at how much humans had learned in such a short time. The aliens had made a serious mistake by underestimating human intelligence and determination. They thought humans were too primitive to pose any threat, but they were wrong. The final piece of intelligence came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison had maintained contact with the old turtle-like alien who had shown sympathy during the council meeting. This being was named Zektar and belonged to a species called the Threnodi. Through careful communication, Zektar revealed crucial information about how the Galactic Council actually worked. The Council operated on an ancient principle called demonstrated superiority. Any species that could prove they were stronger or smarter than another species automatically gained higher status and control over the defeated species' resources. The system was designed to reward strength and punish weakness. This meant that if humanity could somehow prove they were superior to their oppressors, the entire power structure would shift in their favor. President Carter smiled as she read Zektar's message. The aliens had created a system that rewarded exactly the kind of behavior humans excelled at. Earth would use the galaxy's own rules to turn the tables on their enemies. The study phase was complete, and it was time to begin the real work. 6 months after the humiliation at the Galactic Council, President Susan Carter activated the second phase of Project Looking Glass. Human agents across the galaxy received coded messages hidden in routine work reports. The time for passive observation was over and the real operation was about to begin. Earth would not attack its enemies directly, but would use their own weaknesses to destroy them from within. Captain Ron Hayes stood in a crowded factory on Zeltharia Prime, surrounded by alien workers from a dozen different species. These beings had been laboring for the Zeltharian ruling class for generations and had never been treated with respect or given fair payment. Ron had spent months earning their trust by working alongside them and sharing their hardships. Now he was ready to teach them something the Zeltharians would never expect. During lunch breaks and shift changes, Ron began sharing stories about Earth's history. He told them about revolutions and worker movements that had changed the balance of power on his homeworld. He explained how organized groups of workers could shut down entire industries if they coordinated their efforts properly. The alien workers listened with growing interest as Ron described tactics for peaceful resistance. Ron did not encourage open rebellion because that would be too obvious and too dangerous. Instead, he taught subtle forms of resistance that would be hard to detect but very effective over time. Workers began taking slightly longer breaks and working just a little bit slower than normal. Equipment started breaking down more often due to small mistakes in maintenance. Computer systems experienced mysterious glitches that took hours to repair. The effects were gradual but devastating. Zeltharian factories that had run smoothly for decades suddenly became unreliable. Production schedules fell behind and quality control suffered. The ruling class brought in technical experts to fix the problems, but they could not find any major defects in the systems. Everything appeared to be working normally, but somehow productivity kept dropping. Meanwhile, Dr. Karen Bell was preparing to destroy the Martian economy using their own greed against them. She had compiled a complete map of real mineral deposits throughout the galaxy, using data stolen from Martian geological surveys. The information proved that rare minerals existed on hundreds of worlds that the Martians claimed were barren. Karen was ready to crash their market manipulation scheme. Karen began by quietly contacting mining companies on remote worlds that the Martians had ignored. She provided them with detailed surveys showing valuable mineral deposits on their planets. These companies started mining operations and soon discovered that the rare materials were much more common than anyone had believed. Word began to spread through independent trade networks. At the same time, Karen leaked selected financial documents that revealed the true scope of Martian market manipulation. She sent the information to news organizations and regulatory agencies across the galaxy. The evidence showed centuries of fraud and price fixing that had cost other species trillions of credits. Karen timed the releases carefully to create maximum impact. The first cracks appeared when several mining companies announced huge discoveries of supposedly rare minerals. Prices began to fluctuate as traders tried to understand what was happening. Then the leaked documents hit the galactic news networks and panic set in. Martian stock prices collapsed as investors realized the entire rare mineral market was built on lies. Martian trade officials tried to maintain control by claiming the new discoveries were fake or the leaked documents were forged. But more evidence kept appearing, and independent scientists confirmed that the mineral deposits were real. Within weeks, the Martian Trade Federation was facing bankruptcy and criminal investigations from multiple galactic law enforcement agencies. Dr. Chris Morgan was working on the most delicate part of the operation. The Kregan Empire was paranoid and violent, so any mistakes could trigger a devastating war. Chris had to find a way to make the Kregans destroy themselves without realizing what was happening. He decided to use their warrior culture and genetic paranoia against them. Chris approached Kregan military leaders claiming to be a human scientist who had discovered a terrible threat to their species. He presented carefully fabricated evidence suggesting that their enemies had developed a biological weapon specifically designed to target Kregan DNA. The evidence was sophisticated enough to fool Kregan scientists, but completely false. The paranoid Kregan leadership believed the threat was real and began planning preemptive strikes against their supposed enemies. Chris encouraged their fears by providing more fake intelligence about secret bioweapon laboratories and enemy research programs. The Kregans became convinced that they were about to face genocide and had to act quickly to survive. The Kregan Empire launched surprise attacks against 3 neutral star systems that Chris had identified as hosting the fictional bioweapon programs. The attacks were brutal and unprovoked, shocking the entire galaxy. Species that had feared Kregan power for generations suddenly turned against them in outrage. The galactic community imposed economic sanctions and military blockades that isolated the Kregan Empire completely. While alien civilizations crumbled around them, human workers continued their assigned tasks with perfect efficiency. The waste. Management contracts that had seemed so humiliating turned out to be incredibly valuable for intelligence gathering. Human teams had access to garbage from every major alien facility, which contained amazing amounts of sensitive information that careless aliens had thrown away. The mining operations on worthless asteroids also proved more useful than expected. Human engineers discovered that many of the supposedly barren rocks contained materials that aliens had overlooked. Earth quietly began stockpiling rare elements and developing new technologies based on alien designs found in discarded technical manuals. Lisa Parks continued her work in the maintenance areas of Nexus Prime Station, mapping every critical system and security flaw. She had identified dozens of ways to disable the station's defenses or communication networks if necessary. More importantly, she had learned how to access the central computer systems that controlled galactic trade and communication networks. President Carter received regular updates on the operation's progress from Dr. Alan Pierce. The intelligence reports showed that all three target species were experiencing serious internal problems that would soon threaten their ability to maintain control over other worlds. The Zeltharian government was facing worker strikes and economic disruption. The Mortian Trade Federation was collapsing under fraud investigations and market manipulation. The Kregan Empire was isolated and facing potential rebellion from conquered peoples. The most satisfying part was that none of the alien species suspected human involvement in their problems. They saw their troubles as internal issues or bad luck rather than coordinated attacks. The arrogant beings who had laughed at humanity's primitive nature could not imagine that the same species was systematically destroying their civilizations. Jake Morrison received a message from President Carter instructing him to request another meeting with the Galactic Council. Earth was ready to renegotiate the humiliating treaties, and the timing was perfect. The major alien powers were too distracted by their own crises to pay much attention to human requests, but they would soon learn that ignoring Earth had been a serious mistake. As the New Horizon departed for Nexus Prime Station, Jake felt very different than he had during his first trip. 6 months ago, he had been a desperate diplomat trying to save his species from humiliation. Now he was returning as the representative of a power that had already proven it could destroy entire civilizations without firing a single shot. The aliens were about to discover what humans could accomplish when they stopped playing by other people's rules. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's long history. 3 of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy were facing complete collapse, and nobody could explain why it was happening so quickly. Delegates filled the great chamber of Nexus Prime Station with an atmosphere of fear and confusion that Jake Morrison could feel as soon as he entered. This time, Jake was not alone, and he was not sitting in the back rows reserved for inferior species. He walked into the chamber, followed by Admiral Patricia Stone, who commanded Earth's new security consultation fleet, and Dr. Vincent Clark, who carried the impressive title of Director of Galactic Affairs. Their seats were now in the middle section where respected species conducted serious business. Vexathari looked much different than he had during Jake's first visit. The arrogant Zeltharian Prime Minister appeared tired and stressed as he struggled to maintain control over his crumbling empire. Worker strikes had shut down major industries across Zeltharian space, and the ruling class could not understand why their normally obedient servants had suddenly become so difficult to manage. The Mortian representative was even worse off. Trade. Director Kilnash faced criminal charges for fraud and market manipulation, while his government tried to avoid complete economic collapse. The Mortian Trade Federation had lost most of its wealth and influence as the truth about their mineral monopoly spread throughout the galaxy. Kilnash kept glancing nervously at the human delegation, as if he suspected they might be connected to his troubles. The most dramatic change was in the Kregan section, where only a few delegates remained. The Kregan Empire was under galaxy-wide sanctions for their unprovoked attacks on neutral systems. Most species had cut diplomatic ties with the Kregans, and their delegate sat alone and isolated, while other aliens avoided making eye contact with him. Emergency. Speaker Velnash called the session to order and immediately began discussing the crisis affecting galactic stability. 3 major civilizations were failing simultaneously, and the economic disruption was spreading to other species. Trade routes were becoming unreliable, and several minor conflicts had erupted as local governments lost confidence in the established order. When Vexthari was invited to speak, he directly accused humanity of somehow causing the Zeltharian worker uprising. He claimed that human maintenance workers had been spreading dangerous ideas about equality and resistance among the servant classes. Vexthari demanded that Earth recall all human workers from Zeltharian space immediately. Jake Morrison stood up slowly and walked to the main speaking platform that had been denied to him during his first visit. He looked out at the thousands of alien delegates with the calm confidence of someone who held all the winning cards in a poker game. When he spoke, his words were translated perfectly and broadcast clearly throughout the chamber. Jake expressed sympathy for the troubles affecting various galactic civilizations and noted that Earth had offered assistance multiple times, but had been ignored or rejected. He suggested that perhaps the problems were caused by internal weaknesses rather than external interference. After all, human workers were just simple laborers who cleaned up garbage and mined worthless rocks according to the treaties signed by this very council. Admiral Stone then requested permission to address the assembly about galactic security concerns. She activated a large holographic display that showed detailed intelligence about the true military capabilities of every major species. The information was so accurate and comprehensive that several delegates gasped in shock as their most closely guarded secrets appeared before the entire council. The Admiral explained that Earth had been conducting a thorough security assessment of galactic civilization as part of their waste management and mining duties. Human workers had observed significant vulnerabilities in alien infrastructure and military systems that could be exploited by hostile forces. She offered to share this intelligence with any species willing to cooperate with Earth security consultation services. Dr. Vincent Clark followed with an even more devastating revelation. He activated another holographic display that showed the locations of human personnel throughout the galaxy. Red dots appeared on star maps indicating human workers on thousands of alien worlds and installations. The display revealed that humans now had access to virtually every important facility in galactic civilization. Clark explained that human workers had been carefully documenting everything they encountered during their assigned duties. Earth now possessed detailed information about alien technology, industrial processes, political systems, and military capabilities. He presented examples of classified information that humans had gathered from garbage disposal and maintenance work, showing that alien security was completely inadequate. The most shocking revelation came when Clark demonstrated Earth's ability to disrupt galactic infrastructure. He gave a signal to Lisa Parks, who was still working in the maintenance sections of Nexus Prime Station. Suddenly, the chamber's main lighting system flickered and dimmed as Lisa temporarily disabled power circuits from her position in the engineering levels. The lights came back on after a few seconds, but the message was clear. Humans could shut down critical systems throughout the galaxy whenever they chose to do so. The alien delegates realized that their servants had become their masters without anyone noticing what was happening. Admiral Stone then revealed the existence of Earth's new fleet. The ships had been built using advanced materials obtained from mining operations and powered by fusion technology developed from studying alien waste disposal systems. Each vessel was smaller than traditional alien warships but far more advanced and maneuverable. The Admiral showed images of human ships conducting training exercises near Earth. The vessels moved with impossible speed and agility, while their weapon systems demonstrated devastating firepower. She explained that Earth had reverse-engineered alien technology and improved upon it using human engineering principles. Jake Morrison returned to the speaking platform for the final revelation. He announced that Earth was prepared to help restore stability to galactic civilization, but only under new terms that reflected humanity's true capabilities. The humiliating treaties signed during his first visit were no longer acceptable given what Earth had learned about alien weaknesses. Jake presented evidence that the Zeltharian Empire, the Mortian Trade Federation, and the Kregan Empire had all been systematically exploiting other species for centuries. He offered to share detailed proof of their crimes with any delegates who were interested in pursuing justice. The three target species could not deny the accusations because the evidence was overwhelming and completely accurate. The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates from smaller species demanded explanations from their former oppressors. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for generations was collapsing as long-hidden truths came to light. Many species realized they had been victims of manipulation and fraud for far longer than they had imagined. Emergency Speaker Velnash called for order, but the damage was already done. The Galactic Council's authority was broken, and nobody knew what would replace it. Jake Morrison stood calmly at the center of the chaos, holding the power to either rebuild galactic civilization or watch it tear itself apart. When the noise finally died down, Jake made his final statement. Earth was willing to lead the galaxy toward a new system based on fairness and cooperation, rather than exploitation and intimidation. Any species that wanted to join this new order would be welcomed as equals regardless of their current technology or military power. Those who preferred the old system of oppression would face the same fate as the Zeltharians, Mortians, and Kragans. The revelation was complete, and there was no going back. Humanity had proven they could infiltrate any society, manipulate any economy, and outmaneuver any military force in the galaxy. The species that had once laughed at human primitiveness now feared human intelligence and determination more than any conventional army. 6 months after the revelation that shattered the old Galactic Council, Jake Morrison sat in the Prime Speaker's chair looking out at a completely transformed chamber. The seating arrangement had been redesigned to reflect new realities, with Earth occupying the central position and former oppressor species relocated to outer sections, where they could participate, but no longer dominate. The chamber itself buzzed with activity as delegates from hundreds of species worked together on the new Galactic Cooperation Accords. The old system of fear and exploitation was being replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. Species were being evaluated based on their contributions and potential, rather than their military power or economic dominance. Vexthari sat quietly in the Zeltharian section, looking much older than he had a year ago. The worker uprising that human agents had helped organize had swept away the old ruling class and established a more democratic government. Zeltharian society was still rebuilding, but they were now partners with Earth rather than enemies. Their advanced manufacturing capabilities combined with human organizational skills had created an economic powerhouse that benefited both species. The Mortian delegation was led by new officials who had replaced the corrupt leaders responsible for centuries of market manipulation. The Mortian people had always been skilled traders, but their talents had been wasted on maintaining fraudulent monopolies. Under the new system, they managed Earth's interstellar banking operations and helped coordinate trade between species that had never trusted each other before. Even the Kragans had found a place in the new order, though their role was very different from their former position as galactic bullies. Human medical technology had solved their genetic crisis and stabilized their declining population. In return, Kragan warriors now served as security contractors for peaceful exploration missions and protection of trade routes. Their military skills were still valued, but they were no longer used for conquest and intimidation. Jake stood up to address the assembly as he had done hundreds of times since becoming Prime Speaker. The position had been created specifically for him after every major species voted unanimously that Earth should lead the new galactic government. It was an honor that still amazed Jake when he thought about how far humanity had come from their humiliating first contact experience. Today's session was focused on the newest members of the galactic community. Dr. Alan Pierce had identified 12 species that were being oppressed by their governments and human advisors, were already in position to assist liberation movements when the time was right. The new accords guaranteed that no species would be subjected to the kind of systematic exploitation that had once been common throughout the galaxy. Jake announced that 3 more oppressed species had successfully overthrown their rulers with assistance from human intelligence operatives. The beings from Corvash Prime had established a democratic government after centuries of military dictatorship. The ocean-dwelling Aquarians had freed themselves from surface-dwelling colonizers who had enslaved them for their rare biological secretions. The insectoid hive queens had broken away from the parasitic species that had been controlling their reproductive cycles. Each liberation had been accomplished using the same methods that Earth had perfected against their former oppressors. Human agents infiltrated oppressor societies and gathered intelligence about weaknesses and corruption. Then, they helped organize resistance movements and provided strategic guidance that turned the oppressed into the liberators. The operations were bloodless when possible, but always effective. Admiral Patricia Stone reported on the expansion of Earth's security consultation fleet. Human ships now patrolled every major trade route in the galaxy, ensuring that pirates and raiders could not disrupt commerce between peaceful species. The HFY fleet also served as a deterrent against any government that might consider returning to the old ways of exploitation and intimidation. The Admiral's ships were marvels of human engineering that combined alien technology with innovative design principles. They were faster and more maneuverable than anything else in space, while carrying weapon systems that could disable enemy vessels without destroying them. The goal was always to capture, rather than kill, because dead enemies could not be reformed and educated. Dr. Vincent Clark presented his latest intelligence summary, which showed the remarkable transformation that had occurred across galactic civilization. Crime rates were down as economic opportunities increased for formerly oppressed species. Trade volumes had doubled as new partnerships replaced old monopolies. Scientific cooperation was advancing faster than ever before, as species shared knowledge instead of hoarding secrets. The most important change was in the treatment of worker populations throughout the galaxy. The example set by the Zeltharian uprising had inspired similar movements on dozens of worlds where servant species had been treated as property rather than people. Human labor organizers continued to spread ideas about dignity and fair treatment that were revolutionizing alien societies. Jake smiled as he remembered his conversation with old Zektar just before this session began. The wise Threnody had revealed that his species had been watching humanity since first contact because they recognized Earth's potential for leadership. Zektar expressed satisfaction that humans had chosen to reform the galactic system rather than simply destroying their enemies and taking over through force. The old alien had also shared an important secret about the previous galactic order. The system of exploitation and intimidation had been maintained by a small group of powerful species who convinced everyone else that it was natural and inevitable. Most aliens had never been given the chance to imagine anything better because alternatives were suppressed or ridiculed. Humanity's greatest achievement was proving that cooperation could be more powerful than domination. As the session continued, Jake reflected on how different the galaxy had become since that terrible day when he first stood before the Galactic Council as a humiliated supplicant. Earth had not achieved its current position through superior technology or overwhelming military force. Instead, they had used uniquely human traits like adaptability, patience, and the ability to find opportunity in adversity. The transformation had required sacrifice and risk from thousands of human agents who lived dangerous lives in alien societies while gathering the intelligence that made everything possible. People like Lisa Parks, who still worked in critical infrastructure positions throughout the galaxy, ensuring that Earth could respond quickly to any threats. Captain Ron Hayes, who continued training liberation movements on oppressed worlds. Dr. Karen Bell, who monitored galactic economic systems to prevent the return of fraudulent monopolies. Jake announced the final item on today's agenda, which was the launch of the Frontier Protection Initiative. Human ships would begin patrolling the galaxy's outer regions where new species were still making first contact with galactic civilization. The goal was to ensure that no species would ever again face the kind of humiliation and exploitation that Earth had experienced. The initiative would establish monitoring stations throughout unexplored space to identify emerging civilizations. Before they could be discovered and exploited by predatory species, human diplomats would make first contact using principles of respect and equality, rather than the intimidation tactics that had been standard practice for centuries. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Jake remained in his chair looking up at the dome showing the stars beyond Nexus Prime Station. Somewhere out there were species that had not yet discovered space travel or made contact with galactic civilization. When those species finally reached the stars, they would find a very different galaxy than the one Earth had encountered. The age of exploitation was over, and the age of cooperation had begun. Humanity had turned the Galactic Council from a place of fear and oppression into something unprecedented in galactic history. It was a government that actually served the needs of its people rather than the ambitions of its rulers. Jake knew that maintaining this new system would require constant vigilance and occasional force, but he was confident that humanity was up to the challenge. Earth had proven that even the most powerful enemies could be defeated by intelligence, patience, and determination. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species that had once been dismissed as primitive servants.